The first thing I heard was not the music. It was my own cane on the ballroom marble, that soft tap drag I had hated at 16, tolerated at 20, and learned to weaponize by 24. It announced me before my face ever could. The limping girl from the kitchen, the one with the dessert trays, the one people smiled past. Then the room went silent in a way music never survived. I looked up from a tower of pistachio cream puffs, just in time to see men step back from him, as if a tide had pulled through the center of the gala and taken courage with it. Dante Salvator stood near the auction dais in a black suit that fit him too cleanly to be honest. He was not loud. That was the terrible thing about him. He did not need to be loud. His stillness made everyone else look guilty. Someone laughed too hard near the champagne fountain. Someone's bracelet hit crystal. Somewhere behind me, Chef Bellini hissed my name because I had stopped moving. I moved again. That was how I survived most rooms. I moved. I kept my head down. I made sugar roses so delicate women gasped over them, then forgot the hands that shaped them. But I saw the man with the knife, not because I was clever. Because I had packed the velvet pastry box he was carrying, and he was holding it wrong. A dessert box balanced in one hand looks light. A box carrying something heavier drags at the wrist. His did. A little, enough. I opened my mouth. Too late. The man got close enough to Dante to smile, close enough to say something I couldn't hear, and then there was a flash of steel under the ballroom lights. Not a gunshot. Worse, somehow, personal. I saw Dante turn, quick as something born in the dark, and the blade meant for his ribs slice across the back of his right hand instead. The room shattered into motion. Men in suits closed in. A woman screamed. The violinist stopped in the middle of a note. Dante caught the attacker's wrist, bent it until the knife clattered, and hit him once across the throat with such brutal efficiency that the man dropped without even earning a second blow. No rage. No noise, just finished. That was what frightened me. The blood came a second later, a dark spill over his knuckles, bright against the white cuff peeking under black wool. One of his men dragged the attacker away. Another barked into an earpiece. Guests turned their faces, not because they were delicate, but because rich people liked violence only when it stayed theoretical. I should have gone back to the kitchen. Instead, I found myself walking toward him with a length of white ribbon in my hand. To this day, I could not have told you why. Instinct, maybe. The same stupid part of me that still reached for fallen trays and crying children and burnt sugar before it could think better. He was looking at the doors, at exits, at men, at threat. Not at his hand. Hold still, I said. It came out quiet, not brave, just practical. 3 of his men turned toward me at once. One actually reached for me, maybe to shove me back, maybe worse. Dante lifted his uninjured hand by an inch, and the man stopped like someone had cut his strings. Only then did Dante look down. His eyes were darker than I expected. Not warm, not cold. Worse than either, measured. I took his wrist before I could think about how insane that was. His skin was cool. The tendons in his hand flexed once under my fingers, a warning or surprise, I couldn't tell. I wrapped the ribbon hard over the slice once, twice, and knotted it tight enough to slow the bleeding. He did not flinch. Neither did I. That was the thing, I think. The first thing that mattered. I did not flinch. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled. As if the room belonged to him and volume was for men who needed help keeping it. I let go of him. Someone from the pastry table. That should have been the end. I took one step back, then another. My hip had started its familiar burn from standing too long. I could feel sweat cooling beneath my chef's jacket. A body was being carried out through the side doors. Nobody was looking at me. They never did. Until he did. I escaped to the service corridor and pushed through the metal door into the alley behind the hotel. February bit through my jacket immediately. Manhattan smelled like wet concrete, old snow, engine smoke, and expensive garbage. I leaned against the brick, closed my eyes, and counted through the sharp ache in my leg. Tap drag, tap drag. My cane settled against the wall. Inside, music tried to restart. A warped, desperate little thing. The door opened again. I did not need to turn around to know it was him. Men like Dante Salvator carried silence out with them. The alley itself seemed to stop making noise. "You left," he said. "I wasn't invited." A ridiculous answer. Nervousness always made me sound like I had borrowed someone else's mouth. He came to stand beside me, not too close, which somehow felt more dangerous. I kept my eyes on the slick black pavement. His hand was still tied with my white ribbon. Blood had climbed through it in thin red lines. "I saw the man before he got to you," I said, because the silence was worse. "He had one of our velvet boxes. He was carrying it wrong. And you told no one? I didn't have time. You had time to touch me." I looked at him then. There was no vanity in the question. No flirtation, only fact. "Yes," I said. Something unreadable moved through his face. A second voice drifted from farther down the alley, around the corner near the loading dock. "Mail. Urgent." Arcury said one cut was enough. "Move the second package." I froze. Dante did not. In one smooth motion, he shifted in front of me, shielding me from the alley mouth while one hand went inside his jacket. Not hurried. Finished. That was the only word for him. Finished before anyone else had properly begun. Footsteps. A curse. One of his men appeared from nowhere, then two more. The voice vanished. A car door slammed on the street beyond. Dante turned his head slightly. "You heard that?" I swallowed. "Yes. Arcury? I think so." His gaze dropped, not to my face, but to my cane, to the way I braced harder on it when I was frightened. Tap drag, my own body betraying me, then his eyes rose again. "What's your name?" "Sophia Bellini." The surname changed something, barely, but enough for me to see it. He held out his uninjured hand. "Your cane," I stared at him. "Why?" "Because if there's a second package, Little Shadow, you won't be standing in an alley alone while my enemies learn your name." Little Shadow, cold, observed. Possessed by the sentence before I even understood it, I should have run. I should have shouted. I should have told him to go to hell, and limped back through the kitchen, and pretended none of it had happened. Instead, because fear made liars of every part of me except the practical one, I gave him the cane. His fingers closed around the walnut handle my father had carved when I was 17, and learning how to walk without apologizing for it. Dante tested its weight once, then handed it to one of his men, and opened the rear door of a black car waiting at the curb like it had been summoned by thought. "I have a bakery shift at 6 in the morning, I said. "You don't anymore." That was not an answer. It was a door closing. I got into the car anyway. The door shut behind me. I woke to unfamiliar quiet, not city quiet. There was no such thing. This was a state quiet, the sort that came wrapped in thick walls and expensive rugs and men with guns pretending not to be in the hallway. For one ugly second, I thought I had dreamed everything. The ballroom, the knife, the alley, the blood on white ribbon. Then I turned my head and saw my cane leaning against an antique wardrobe across the room. I sat up too fast. Pain flared through my hip and down my thigh in a bright line. "Perfect," I muttered. The bedroom was larger than my entire apartment kitchen. Pale walls, a carved ceiling, curtains heavy enough to stop weather. On the bedside table sat a glass of water, 2 painkillers, and a folded note in a masculine hand. "Breakfast. Then we talk." DS. I stared at the initials as if that might make them less infuriating. By the time I got dressed in the soft black clothes someone had left for me, I was angry enough to walk badly on purpose. The house was all dark wood and controlled money. Family portraits watched from the walls. Men in tailored suits nodded into their wrists when I passed. Somewhere downstairs, coffee breathed into the air. I followed it. The kitchen was warm enough to make me want to cry. Copper pots, stone counters, fresh bread, real knives hanging in honest rows. A woman in her 50s with silver-threaded hair was pulling biscotti from the oven with the authority of a queen and the forearms of a dockworker. She looked at me once from my face to my cane and back again. No pity, instant gratitude bloomed in me so sharp it almost hurt. "You're the girl," she said. I bristled. "There's probably a name available if you look hard enough." One corner of her mouth moved. "Good, we keep that tone." "I'm Rosa." Before I could answer, a broad man in a charcoal suit burst through the side door carrying 3 takeout coffees and the expression of someone personally persecuted by life. He looked about 30, handsome in a broken-nose kind of way, and mournful enough to be wearing black for his own metabolism. "Rosa," he said, "Teresa tried to kill me again." Rosa did not look up. "With what this time? Pasta? That isn't attempted murder, that's courtship." He pressed a hand to his chest. "I am on a plan," Rosa snorted. "Your plan is loneliness." His eyes found me then, and all the melodrama dropped into curiosity. "Ah, you're awake. Wonderful. Maybe now the boss stops staring at walls like they owe him money." "I can hear you, Nico," said Dante from the doorway. Nico closed his eyes briefly, like a man suffering a spiritual test. "Of course you can." Dante crossed the kitchen with the same contained force he'd had in the ballroom, only sharpened now by daylight. He had changed clothes, fresh black shirt, dark trousers, no tie. The white ribbon was gone, replaced by a clean bandage around his right hand. My stomach did a strange, uncertain thing at the sight of it, as if memory lived in my fingers. He stopped at the other side of the island. "Sit," he said. "Good morning to you too." Something almost like amusement flickered near his mouth. It vanished before I could trust it. I sat because my leg wanted the chair more than my pride wanted the argument. Nico set a coffee near me with surprising gentleness. "No sugar," he said gravely. "Everyone in this house suffers." Rosa smacked the back of his head with a dish towel. Dante remained standing. "You heard a name last night. Arcuri. Matteo Arcuri is my head of security." He said it flatly, but there was a crackling edge beneath the control. "That means one of 3 things. You misheard. Someone used his name to mislead us, or Matteo is compromised. And which do you think it is? I don't think I confirm." It should have comforted me, that certainty. It didn't. I wrapped both hands around the coffee just to have something solid. "Can I go home after that?" "No," the word landed cleanly. No apology tucked around it, no false softness. "My mother will be worried. She's already been told you were retained for a private event and stayed overnight due to weather." I stared. "There was no weather. There is now." Nico looked out the window as if checking whether Dante had bullied the sky into cooperation. "Looks cloudy to me." Dante didn't glance at him. "Sophia stays here until I know whether hearing that name put her at risk. You don't get to decide that alone." He met my eyes. "I just did." The silence that followed felt enormous. Rosa slid a plate of toast toward me, as if feeding cornered animals were part of her ordinary morning duties. I took a breath that hurt. "You dragged me out of an alley because I overheard one sentence. You tied my hand with a pastry ribbon and walked away before I could speak." His gaze dropped briefly to my fingers around the coffee cup, then returned. "Women in my world do not do that. I'm not in your world." "No," he said. "That's the problem." Nico, apparently deciding death was worth it, muttered, "Good luck to all of us then." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. It was a stupid impulse. Smiling in front of Dante felt like stepping barefoot near glass. Still, the corner of my mouth betrayed me. Dante saw it. For 1 second the air in the kitchen changed. Not softened, tightened. Awareness moved through it like heat through sugar just before it burns. He looked away first. That should not have mattered. It did. Rosa sent Nico to carry boxes upstairs for no reason. I could detect, except that she had known him too long and enjoyed it. When he lumbered out complaining that no one respected a man's glucose levels, Dante pulled out the chair across from me and sat at last. He was close enough now for me to catch the scent of him under the coffee and bread. Cedar, winter air, and something colder. Night, maybe. The smell of someone who had been outside in the dark and brought it back in with him. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. So I did. The velvet box, the drag of weight in the attacker's hand. The slash, the voice in the alley, the second package. Every detail I had because pastry work taught you attention or it ruined you. Butter changed by a degree. Sugar turned from gold to bitter in a breath. A room told on itself if you listened. When I finished, Dante sat back slightly. "You notice everything. Only what people think doesn't matter. He was quiet long enough for my skin to tighten. Then, eat, I blinked. That's not a normal response. It is if you're staying. There it was again, not a threat. Worse, certainty. I took a piece of toast because refusing suddenly felt childish. He watched my hands, not my mouth. That was somehow more intimate. Your bakery, he said. Bellini, it's my family S. Your father, dead. No softness crossed his face, but something in him stilled further, as if he had reached a wall he recognized. How? Robbery, I said automatically. The lie had become muscle memory over the years, not because I believed it, but because saying I didn't made everyone so unbearably kind. His gaze sharpened. You don't believe that, my throat tightened. That isn't your business. No, he said, but it may become mine. I hated the way fear and curiosity tangled inside me whenever he spoke like that. Hated more that part of me believed him. He rose. Nico will show you the grounds. Rosa will make sure you have what you need. And if I try to leave, he paused at the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, bandaged, steady. Then I'll follow you again, little shadow. He left without waiting to see what the words did to me. The front door, I learned an hour later, locked from the outside with a sound I felt all the way in my teeth. By noon, I knew 3 things. First, the Salvetter estate had more cameras than some banks and fewer flowers than any rich person's house ought to. Second, Rosa ran the kitchens, the staff, half the security schedules, and probably the moral weather. Third, fear changed shape when it had time to settle. It stopped being a scream and became 1,000 smaller things. The shadow under every door, the men stationed at windows. The fact that even the dogs on the grounds were trained not to bark unless told. Nico escorted me on what he called a non-kidnappy tour, which I supposed was meant to reassure me, and did, against my will. That building's the old carriage house, he said, pointing with the solemnity of a museum guide. Now it's surveillance, very romantic. Over there is the West Garden, where Teresa rejected me for the 5th time because I said olive oil was not an emotion. She rejected you because you talk like that. He sighed deeply. You understand me better than she does. I laughed before I could stop myself. It startled both of us. The grounds were winter bare, all clipped hedges and stone paths. My cane tapped against the paving in that soft, familiar rhythm. Tap drag, tap drag. Nico slowed automatically to match me without making it noticeable, which made me like him in spite of the theatrics. Why does he call you the boss like that? I asked. Because he is the boss like that. No, I mean like he was born already wearing a black coat and looking disappointed. Nico barked a laugh. Accurate, but no. He used to smile more, apparently. Before my time, people say he was worse after Bianca. The name caught. Bianca, Nico's face shut a little. His sister. He changed the subject after that, which told me enough to know it mattered. Back in the kitchen, Rosa handed me an apron without discussion. You cut oranges? Yes. You pipe cream? Yes. You complain while working. Only when kidnapped. Good. You'll fit. There is a mercy in work when your mind is trying to destroy you. Butter still needed folding. Zest still needed lifting without the bitter pith. Sugar still obeyed heat or it didn't. I found my body returning to itself by degrees as I measured flour and egg whites and watched cream come up under the whisk. Teresa arrived an hour later, short, fierce, and completely unimpressed by either my limp or Dante Salvetter's empire. She took in the trays, sniffed, and announced that Nico's lunch would contain exactly 1 leaf and emotional damage. Please marry him, I said before I could stop myself. If only to improve his quality of life. Her smile flashed. I prefer him suffering. It keeps him humble. By the time the afternoon light had turned the kitchen windows silver, I had made a sugar swan for Rosa's dessert table. Not because anyone asked. Because my hands got restless when the rest of me couldn't move freely. Clear pulled sugar, curved while it was still hot, spun into something fragile enough to break if breathed on wrong. Rosa stood beside me. That's beautiful. It's ridiculous, I said. No one eats the swan, they just stare at it until it collapses. Her look slid, very briefly, toward the doorway. I turned. Dante had been there long enough to watch the last curve settle. He had no business belonging in a kitchen, and somehow made the room look designed around him anyway. Men like him usually felt ornamental in domestic spaces. He did not. He made everything feel occupied. "Is it edible?" he asked. "It's sugar." That wasn't the question. I set the swan down carefully. "Yes." He came closer, not to me, to the swan. His gaze moved over the delicate neck, the clear wings, the hollow body that looked strong until light hit it. "What's inside?" he asked. "Nothing. You don't make empty things." The answer rose without permission. "Air, heat, a shape that holds until it doesn't." Silence. I became acutely aware of my own hand on the counter, of the flower on my wrist, of the space between us narrowing into something I had not agreed to and could not quite move away from. He reached out. Not for me, for a broken thread of sponge sugar near the swan's wing. He caught it between thumb and forefinger. His bandaged hand stayed at his side. For a stupid second, I wanted to know if it still hurt. "You cook like you're confessing," he said. "That is an unsettling thing to say in a kitchen." A sound came from somewhere near the windows. One of his men. Tommaso, I realized belatedly, the dark-haired man with lawyer eyes who'd been in the hall that morning. He stepped in carrying a folder and looked from Dante to me to the sugar swan. "We found the source of the velvet boxes," he said. "Work." The air changed instantly. Dante turned. "And hotel inventory logs were altered. One signature missing from the chain." "Arcury?" Tommaso held his gaze. "No, yours." I stopped breathing for a second. Dante's expression did not move. "Explain." "Digital copy only. Someone inserted authorization under your code. It gives them access to any service corridor in the hotel. So someone close enough to know his systems, close enough to borrow his authority." My hand tightened around the counter edge. "Then it wasn't random." Tommaso's eyes flicked to me, less cold than I expected, less kind too. "Nothing in his life is random." Dante took the folder with his good hand. "Who touched the logs?" "3 people," Tommaso said. "Arcury, hotel management, and one off-site archive company Bellini Bakery uses for event invoices." My stomach dropped. "Bellini," I said. Dante looked up slowly. I hated the way the room seemed to tilt. "We contract storage for invoices, old orders, receipts, donor events. That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means," Dante said, but I didn't think he did. "Not yet, not nearly enough." He stepped away with Tommaso, voices lowering near the pantry door. I should not have listened. I did anyway. "Her father handled books for Valent once," Tommaso murmured. Dante's reply was too quiet to catch. Then, more clearly from Tommaso, "If it's the same Bellini, this didn't start last night." My pulse skidded. I looked down at my cane where it leaned against the prep table, walnut worn smooth by years of my palm. My father had carved it during physical therapy because he hated the ugly pharmacy aluminum one more than he feared splinters. He had smiled while sanding the curve. Said if the world insisted on making me lean, I ought to lean on something beautiful. Dante turned back toward me before I could think further. For one impossible beat, I saw something in his face that was not suspicion. Recognition, not of me, of a wound. Then he sealed it. That evening, after the staff meal, I went upstairs with sugar still in the creases of my fingers and found a guard outside my door who had not been there before. Someone was already moving against us. Dante, from the first tap of her cane on marble, I had known she didn't belong in my rooms, not because she was weak. Because she was not arranged for survival the way the rest of us were. She saw my blood, tied it shut, and left before I could make it currency. Then she said Bellini, and the dead began knocking again. If Corrado had reached into her life before I found her, then I was already too late in ways I had spent 14 years refusing to name. Night made the estate feel truer. In daylight, money softened things. At night, you could hear what the house really was. Doors clicked in coded patterns. Men's shoes crossed marble and stopped. A radio cracked once, then went dead. Even the air tasted armed. I couldn't sleep. My hip was bad in cold weather. worse when I was anxious, and impossible when both decided to become intimate enemies. Sometime after midnight, I gave up pretending and went downstairs in search of the heating pad Rosa had promised was hidden in the pantry if I was willing to commit theft. The kitchen was dark except for the low light over the stove. I found the heating pad, plugged it in, and stood leaning against the counter while it warmed. That was when the lights died. Not flickered, died. Every sound in the house stopped for half a breath. Then everything happened at once. A shout from the hall, running feet. Somewhere outside, 2 flat pops too controlled to be random. Gunfire, but silenced. My body knew before my mind did. I grabbed my cane and turned toward the back service corridor just as a hand caught my elbow. I nearly screamed. "It's me, Dante." The darkness hid most of him, but not the command in his voice. He moved close, one hand firm on my arm, the other guiding me down the narrow hall toward the stairs I hadn't even known existed. "What happened? Generator line was cut." "That sounds terrible." "It is." We descended into cool air and oak-scented dark. The wine cellar opened around us in long stone aisles. Emergency lights kicked in at floor level, red and strange, making his face look carved from something harder than skin. "Stay here," he said. "No." His head turned a fraction. "No," the fear made me honest. "If people are shooting at your house, I do not want to be alone in the dark with expensive bottles." The ghost of a breath left him, not quite laughter. Not quite disbelief. He led me deeper in behind a brick pillar and stacked cases. Above us, the house thudded with contained violence, not chaos, worse, response. I hated that I could tell the difference already. My leg chose that moment to seize. A hard cramp from hip to knee, vicious enough to pull a sound out of me before I could bite it back. My cane slipped against the stone. Dante caught me before I hit the floor. The shock of him was immediate. One arm around my waist, the other bracing my shoulder, his body taking my weight with terrifying ease. I sucked in air through my teeth and tried to step away. "Don't," he said. "I'm trying not to die with dignity." "You're doing fine." "That's a lie." "Yes." The honesty should not have made me want to laugh. It nearly did. My leg trembled again. He lowered me onto a wooden crate with a care so controlled it undid something in me. Men like him weren't supposed to do careful. They were supposed to do decisive and distant and dangerous. Not kneel in the half-dark in front of a woman they barely knew. "What are you doing?" I whispered as he set my cane beside me. "Tell me where it hurts." I stared down at him. At the broad line of his shoulders in black. At the bandage on his right hand. At the impossible fact of Dante Salvetter kneeling. "It's fine. That isn't what I asked." Another shot sounded above us, muffled by floors and money. I swallowed. "Hip, sometimes the thigh." "It locks." He looked at my leg the way he looked at rooms, calculating, respectful of threat. "May I?" Nothing in my life had prepared me for that word in his mouth. Not from him, not like that. I nodded because speaking had become unreliable. His hands were warm through the fabric of my trousers. One just above my knee, the other careful at the side of my hip, never crude, never presumptuous, only steady pressure working against the knot of pain. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. "This?" he asked quietly. "Yes," he adjusted. The cramp eased by degrees so sharp relief felt almost intimate. I closed my eyes for 1 second too long. When I opened them, he was looking at me. Not at my leg, not at my mouth. At me, fully. The red emergency lights painted the edge of his cheekbone and left the rest in shadow. It was close enough to be dangerous. Close enough that if I leaned down a little, or if he rose up a little, something irreversible would happen in a wine cellar while men bled upstairs. His gaze dropped once, briefly, to my lips. Then a voice crackled in his earpiece. "South Terrace clear, 1 down, we need you." He leaned back immediately. There it was, the stop, cleaner than any kiss would have been. Dante stood and held out my cane. "Thank you," I said, hating how unsteady it sounded. His jaw shifted once. "For what?" "For asking." He went very still. Somewhere in the house above us, a door slammed. Bootsteps. Then Nico's voice, astonishingly audible even through walls and crisis. If I get shot before Teresa admits she loves me, I'm haunting all of you. I laughed. I actually laughed, startled and helpless. Dante looked at the ceiling for one short second, as if asking a private god for restraint. That man, he said, is the reason I drink. Does he know that? He thinks it makes us close. The answer warmed the cellar in a way the emergency lights couldn't. He offered me his uninjured hand to stand. I took it. My fingers fit against his palm with frightening ease. When I rose, the front of my body brushed his coat. The contact lasted no longer than a breath. It stayed everywhere. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked, because if I didn't speak, I would notice the heat between us too clearly. His expression closed. "About the alley," I pressed. "About why I'm really here." He considered me for a long moment. Outside the cellar, the house resumed its violent pulse. Then he said, "You were not taken because you heard a name. You were taken because the man in the alley saw you hear it." Cold worked its way under my ribs. "He described you before he died," Dante said. "Limps, Bellini, pastry girl. That means if there's a breach inside my house, there is already a reason to remove you." I gripped the cane harder. "So I'm bait." "No," his voice changed. Lower, harder. "You're under my protection." That should have reassured me more than it did. He glanced toward the stairs. "We're moving rooms tonight. Because the attack confirmed what I needed. Which is, that last night did not begin last night." He took a step toward the exit. Then stopped and looked back. "Stay close, little shadow." This time the name landed differently. Not warm, not yet, but no longer only possession, more like placement, a fact he had decided to keep. By dawn, the cut generator line, the dead man on the terrace, and the new lock on my bedroom door had turned one mystery into something worse. It was not random. The next morning smelled like burnt espresso and rain. I found Dante in the smaller study off the east hall, where a fire burned low in the grate, and 3 men in dark suits were pretending not to be exhausted. Tommaso stood near the window with a stack of papers. Matteo Arcuri, head of security, clean jaw, soldier posture, easy voice, leaned against a bookshelf like a man who trusted himself in every room. I recognized him only because Dante had pointed him out from the staircase once, too casually. If he noticed me noticing him, he didn't show it. Dante looked worse than anyone else, which on him translated to almost human. The bandage on his hand had been changed again. There was stubble at his jaw. His shirt cuffs were rolled once, precise even in disorder. I stayed in the doorway. "There's poison in your coffee." Every head in the room turned. Matteo smiled faintly. "Good morning to you too." I walked straight to Dante's desk, took the demi-tasse before anyone could stop me, and held it under my nose. Bitter almond sat under the roast, thin and wrong. Not enough to kill immediately, enough to drop a man hard. Tommaso swore very softly. Dante's gaze never left my face. "How do you know?" "I make fillings and syrups for a living. I know when sweetness is hiding something rot." I crossed to the potted lemon tree near the window and poured the coffee into the soil. Matteo moved first, grabbing my wrist halfway through as if on instinct. His grip was firm but not cruel. I looked up at him sharply. He let go at once. "Sorry," the room had changed. One of the guards rushed the cup away. Tommaso began barking orders into his phone. Dante remained where he was, eyes on me, as if the poison mattered less than the fact that I had stepped into the center of his room and stopped it. "I told you," I said too quickly, nerves spilling into speech. "People think because I make pretty things I only notice pretty things, but burnt sugar and cyanide have the same dishonest edge if you." "Sophia." I stopped. He rose. "Come here." Every instinct told me not to cross a study full of armed men, because a mafia boss had said 3 words in a calm voice. My body ignored them and moved anyway. He took my cane from my hand before I understood why. "I'm borrowing this," he said. "For what?" He turned the silver cap at the handle once. "Nothing," again. A third time harder, the top loosened. The room disappeared. I stared as he drew out a tightly rolled strip of oilskin hidden in the hollow shaft. No one spoke. Even Matteo looked shocked. My father's hands flashed through me in memory. sanding walnut in our kitchen, smiling through tired eyes, telling me beautiful things could still be useful if you built them right. Tommaso came closer. Dante unrolled it open on the desk blotter. At first it looked like nonsense. Columns, dates, ingredient codes, flour, sugar, almond paste, citrus oil, delivery routes. Then my breath caught so hard my chest hurt. "That's my father's shorthand," I said. The words came out thin. Nobody spoke. I moved closer on an unsteady leg and braced one hand on the desk. The page was old, edges stained dark by oil and time, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's capital B leaned too far left. His number 7s always wore a bar through them. When I was little, I used to copy his invoices on scrap paper just to make him laugh. Tommaso looked at me. "Can you read it?" "Yes." The answer terrified me. I traced a line without touching it. "This isn't ingredient inventory, it's a shipping mask." He used kitchen terms to stand in for something else. Dante said nothing. He only watched. I swallowed and kept going. 20 sacks of flour doesn't mean flour, it means weight. Almond paste is cash. Citrus oil. My pulse kicked once hard. Explosives. Tommaso swore again. Matteo straightened away from the shelf. "How do you know that?" "Because my father used to teach me order systems like bedtime stories." I heard my own voice begin to fray and hated it. Because he said if anyone ever copied his books, they should have to deserve understanding them. Because he made me memorize ratios. I stopped. The room blurred around the edges. Dante came around the desk. Not quickly. That was not his way. But there was something in the set of his shoulders that made the other men move back half a step without being told. "He gave you the cane," Dante said. It was not a question. I nodded. "When?" "The year I stopped pretending I didn't need it." I could barely hear myself. "He carved it by hand. Said if the world stared, I might as well give it something worth looking at." My throat closed. "He hid this inside and never told me." "Or he did," Dante said quietly, "and you forgot." I looked up sharply. "I would not forget something like this." "No," he said. "You wouldn't." His gaze dropped to the ledger again. The fire in the grate snapped once. I drew a breath that hurt. "My father didn't die in a robbery." Nobody in the room moved. "I've known that for years," I said. "I just never had proof." 2 men came into the bakery after closing. They didn't take money. They took his office apart. They asked where his copies were. He told me to get under the prep table and stay there no matter what I heard. My fingers tightened against the desk edge. I stayed. The shame of it had never thinned, not once. When I came out, he was still alive for maybe a minute, maybe less. I stared at the old oilskin because looking at people was impossible. He told me to keep the cane. He told me if anyone important ever followed me outside, I should listen before I ran. Silence filled the study like smoke. Of all the things I had expected to say in my life, that had never been one of them. Nico, who had drifted in halfway through with a tray, and the uncanny instincts of a man forever arriving at the worst possible moment, froze by the door. "I can come back with these biscotti at a less traumatic time." No one answered him. He set the tray down very, very carefully and retreated 2 steps anyway. Tommaso pinched the bridge of his nose. "Who knew your father kept records for the Valent operation?" "My father did small accounting jobs for whoever paid on time," I said. "Restaurants, charities, hotels." "He never called it an operation." Dante's eyes lifted to mine. "Because if he had, you would have remembered the word." Something about that broke the last of my balance. I laughed once, which turned into something uglier before it could become crying. I hated crying in front of anyone. I hated it more in front of him. I pressed my fist against my mouth and failed completely. Dante took 1 step closer. Then he stopped. There it was again. The restraint, more intimate than touch. "What does the last column mean?" Tommaso asked, voice gentler now. I forced myself back to the page. The final notes were smaller, hurried. A symbol marked 3 entries, an open circle cut by a line. I frowned. This wasn't my father's. "Whose?" Matteo asked. "I don't know." I squinted harder. But it was added later, different pressure, different ink. Tommaso leaned in. "Locations, Maybe, I translated as I went. East loading dock, church basement, Salvator kitchen archive. Dante went still. Every man in the room felt it. Salvator kitchen archive, Tommaso repeated. My skin went cold. What is that? Dante answered without looking at me. The back records room of my family's old restaurant. Understanding moved through me slowly, then all at once. Bianca, the restaurant, the bombing Nico hadn't meant to tell me about. I looked at his bandaged hand, at the line of his jaw. This is connected to your sister, I said. He said nothing. That was answer enough. Tommaso gathered the page with gloved fingers. I'll cross-reference every location. Matteo stepped forward. I'll lock down the records room myself. Dante's gaze shifted to him then, sharp and unreadable, just a second, but I saw it, suspicion. Not certainty, not yet. A shadow passing over glass. He took the oilskin back before anyone else could touch it. No one moves alone, he said. Not tonight. Nico, from near the door, lifted one tentative finger. Does this include me and my war against carbohydrates? Rose's voice floated from the hall. Especially you. The absurdity of it landed exactly where grief had cracked me open. I made an ugly sound that was almost a laugh again. Dante looked at me at the same moment, and for one terrible, charged breath, the study forgot the men, the ledger, the dead. He reached toward my face. Stopped. His hand hovered once near my cheek, then closed into a fist at his side. I need air, I whispered. No one tried to stop me. Dante followed anyway. The east terrace was wet with rain. Marble slick under my cane. The city a far bruise of light beyond the trees. I gripped the balustrade and let the cold hit me until the shaking slowed. He came to stand beside me, not touching. Never where I expected him to be. You should have told me sooner, he said. I didn't know what to tell. That your father was murdered. I don't tell strangers the worst thing that ever happened to me. His face changed at that. Barely. Enough. You don't consider me a stranger, he said. It wasn't arrogance. It was observation. That made it worse. No, I admitted, and hated how much it cost. Rain gathered on the stone between us. Somewhere below, a gate buzzed open. Somewhere inside, men began moving faster. Dante looked out into the dark. The person who added those notes knew my family's dead. Who is Corrado Vescari? I asked. That made him turn. The name had been half hidden in the margin, just initials and habit, but I had seen it. CV written small, near the entry for the restaurant archive. He took too long to answer. The man who taught me how to survive, he said at last, and what it would cost. Then he looked back toward the house, where footsteps were already changing rhythm. Betrayal had not been proved. But it had entered the room. War did not arrive with a declaration. It arrived as a phone call cut short in the middle of breakfast. As Tommaso dropping a folder and reaching for the gun under his jacket before the papers hit the floor. As Rosa turning the stove off with one hard twist and ordering the staff away from the windows. It arrived with Dante saying my name once. That was enough. By the time I reached the front hall, Nico already had my coat in one hand and my cane in the other. Good news, he said, breathless. Teresa packed you emergency biscotti. That is not how good news works. It is in this house. Dante came down the staircase 2 steps at a time, phone to his ear. Bandaged hand flexing once at his side. No police, move everyone from the south gate. Tommaso stays with the records. Matteo takes the east road. He ended the call and looked at me. Car. Now, what happened? The church basement on your father's ledger was hid an hour ago, empty when we got there. He took my cane from Nico and pressed it into my palm himself. That means we were late or someone told them we were coming. You think there's a traitor. I think too much, and it annoys me. Nico opened the front door. We love a self-aware monarch. Dante ignored him with professional skill. The rain had turned mean. Cold needling rain, needling wind. My cane slipped once on the front steps, and Dante's hand closed around my elbow before gravity could embarrass me. That was the first almost. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the heat of his palm through my coat and the impossible steadiness of being held exactly long enough. He let go immediately. The convoy moved fast through Manhattan. Black cars, dark windows. Wipers beating time against the windshield. I sat in the back with Dante while Nico drove and muttered insults at traffic with the intensity of a betrayed poet. The city streamed gray around us. Construction tarps, wet neon, delivery bikes cutting impossible lines through cabs and rain. My fingers worried the curve of my cane until they hurt. Dante was on his phone more than off it. Names. Orders, locations. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The men on the other end sounded frightened anyway. "Where are we going?" I asked when he finally put the phone down. "St. Gabriel S. A church. A safe room under one. That feels suspiciously like a sentence a criminal would say." Nico lifted a finger from the wheel. "In our defense, we are criminals." "Speak for yourself," Dante said. Nico looked into the rearview mirror. "This is emotional abuse." I pressed my lips together against a laugh and failed. Dante noticed. I knew he did because the corner of his mouth changed by half a degree, then sealed again. Second almost. A small thing, still enough. Traffic slowed near Canal Street. One red light too long. One delivery van stalled at the curb. One motorbike moving up too quickly along the passenger side. Dante saw it first. Down. He hit me in the seat at the same time, hard hand at the back of my neck, his body over mine a fraction before the window exploded inward. Glass sprayed the car. Nico swore with inventive theology. Gunfire cracked, loud now, no silencers, no pretending. The car jerked left. Dante's weight covered me completely. I felt the brutal restraint in it, that he could have pinned me, hurt me, taken anything in that chaos, and instead every inch of him was arranged only to shield. His bandaged hand braced against the seat above my head. I heard him fire twice through the shattered window, a scream outside, tires, another impact from behind. "Boss!" Nico shouted. "Drive, I am driving, everyone always says it like I'm journaling." The rear window burst. Something hot scored across Dante's shoulder. He didn't make a sound. Blood began to spread under the black of his coat. "Dante, stay down, little shadow." The name landed low and warm enough to frighten me. The car fishtailed through a yellow light. A second vehicle clipped us, hard enough to throw my hip into the door and white pain through my leg. I bit back a cry. Dante turned, checked me once with his eyes, then fired again with terrifying calm. When it ended suddenly. Nico took 3 impossible turns, dropped under a bridge, and shot through the service entrance of St. Gabriel's with the horn blaring like a personal insult to God. By the time the gates slammed behind us, my ears rang and my hands were shaking too hard to hide it. Dante got out first, came around, and opened my door. Rain hit us instantly. "You're bleeding," I said. "So are you." I looked down. A thin line of blood crossed the back of my hand where glass had cut me, meaningless. His shoulder was darkening by the second. The church basement smelled like stone dust and candle wax. Somebody had converted the old archive room into a safe room years ago. Metal cabinets, cots, monitors, a table full of trauma supplies. Tommaso arrived 5 minutes later swearing into his phone. Matteo did not. That silence sat in the room like another man. "Can you stitch?" Rosa asked me over speakerphone after Tommaso got her on the line. "Not people. I know you're not a miracle. But stable hands? Yes. Then fix his shoulder until the doctor gets there and stop letting men tell you they're fine." The line clicked dead. Tommaso looked at me. Dante looked at the wall. I set my cane aside and opened the medical kit with fingers that still shook. "Sit." He sat. Tommaso and Nico retreated to the door with the exaggerated tact of men who knew exactly what they were seeing and planned to survive it. I cut the shirt carefully around the graze. Not a bullet inside, thank God, just a brutal tear along the top of his shoulder, enough blood to make my stomach go cold. "You can still tell me to stop," I said. "No," I cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch. I might have hated him for that if I had not understood suddenly that flinching was a luxury men like him lost young. When I pressed the bandage down, my fingers brushed his skin. His breath changed, only a little, enough, third almost. I made the knot and stepped back. "Done," He caught my wrist, not hard, never hard. I looked at his hand around me and then at his face. He released me at once, jaw tightening as if he'd touched a live wire. I remember why, he said, almost to himself. Why what? He looked at the white strip of gauze over his shoulder. Then at the old white scar, crossing the back of his right hand beneath the fresh bandage from the ballroom. Why you? It should have frightened me more than it did. Before I could answer, Tommaso crossed the room with his phone already up. His face had gone flat in the way bad news taught it to. The East warehouse just went up, he said. Corrado sent a message. He turned the screen. On it was a single photograph, fire, a charred loading dock, and spray-painted across a concrete wall in black, "You kept the wrong girl." The room changed shape around those words. Nico exhaled slowly. Well, that feels personal. Dante rose, too fast, too still. I should have moved back, I didn't. He looked down at me, at the cut on my hand, at the rain still drying on my hair. Then he cupped the side of my face with his good hand. The gesture was so gentle it broke something open in me. If I tell you to leave, he said quietly, you should. My voice failed once before it came back. And if I can't, his composure cracked by one fraction. He kissed me, not like a conqueror. Not like a man taking. Like a man holding the line against himself until the line disappeared. It was brief and devastating and careful in the way only truly dangerous things can be careful. His mouth touched mine once, then again, like the second time was a mistake he had chosen anyway. I clutched the front of his ruined shirt because the room had moved. When he pulled back, his forehead nearly touched mine. War has arrived, he said, and this time there was no door left to close behind us. By the end of the week, I had learned the geography of war. It was not maps, not really. It was absences. The empty chair in Dante's study because one of his captains had stopped answering calls. The kitchen window Rosa no longer opened because a sniper had once found the angle from the orchard. The way Nico joked louder when the news got worse, as if volume itself might outrun dread. And it was rules, endless rules. Don't stand still near glass. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't go anywhere without 2 cars and a man who looks bored enough to kill on principle. I broke the biggest rule on Friday. It started because my mother called crying, not panicked. Worse, trying not to panic. Someone had come into the bakery asking for me. A polite man, she said. Gray coat, too much cologne. He bought 3 almond tarts and smiled without warmth. Don't go in tomorrow, I told her at once. Why? Because my life had split down the middle, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. Because I had brought danger to our flour-dusted little storefront with the lace curtains and chipped tile and my father's name over the door. Because I said so, I snapped. She went quiet. Sophia, I closed my eyes. Please. Dante was in Brooklyn meeting a union broker. Tommaso had taken 2 men to the docks. Nico was driving Rosa to see Teresa's cousin, who apparently knew a priest who knew an honest passport man, which in this city counted as ordinary. Matteo, calm as ever, offered to send a team to the bakery. I should have let him. Instead, I said I wanted to go myself. You absolutely do not, Rosa said. I'm not hiding while my mother stands behind the counter alone. You are if you want her alive. That should have settled it. It didn't. I told myself I needed only 10 minutes. Enough to get my mother out. Enough to take the old photo box from my father's office and any papers left under the false flower shelf. Enough to make one decision for my own life instead of being moved through it by armed men with keys. Tommaso came back just in time to stop me at the front hall. If you leave this house without Dante's order, he said, I will have to choose between restraining you and disappointing a woman with a cane. Both options make me tired. You can disappoint me later. His expression tightened. Sophia, I looked at him then, really looked, the exhaustion under his eyes, the patience he did not owe me. The thin line between duty and concern. My mother is there, I said. Please. Something gave in his face, not agreement, resignation. I'm going with you, he said. That seems wise, Nico announced from the staircase, arriving with a garment bag and terrible timing. And by wise I mean terrible. I want that formally recorded. Rosa swatted at all of us with a dish towel she had absolutely no intention of using on actual dishes again. Bring her back with the same number of holes she left with. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and fear. My mother had already closed early. The sign in the window said family emergency in my own handwriting because apparently disaster respected branding. Tommaso swept the back room, one hand inside his coat. I moved to the office and knelt with difficulty by the old flower shelf. The false panel was where my father had always hidden cash. Behind it, I found the photo box, a bundle of invoices, and an envelope with my name in his handwriting. I heard the front bell jingle, then shouting, then the crack of gunfire at a distance too small to lie about. Tommaso's voice, down, I lurched up too fast. Pain shot through my hip. The office door slammed inward and Tommaso hit me hard across the shoulders, driving me behind the desk as glass exploded from the front display case. My cane skidded across the tile. Another shot. Another, he fired back once, twice. I crawled toward my cane and saw blood spreading under his jacket. No, it's not bad, he lied. The third bullet hit the pastry case where I had stood 10 seconds earlier, showering eclairs and sugar glass across the floor in a glittering ruin that felt obscene. Tommaso grabbed my arm. Back exit, now. My mother, she's already out with the driver. Move. He practically threw me through the alley door. One of Dante's men was waiting with the car. Tommaso followed, pale now, hand pressed hard to his side. The ride back to the estate was a blur of sirens we weren't calling, and my own breathing gone ugly. Tommaso stayed conscious out of spite alone. I held pressure over the wound because the man in the front kept running red lights and I could do nothing else. You're very annoying, Tommaso murmured through clenched teeth. I stared at him. You're shot. Yes, he said, and still correct. He smiled briefly, and that frightened me more than the blood. The doctor took him upstairs. Dante arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't shout. I almost wished he had. He came into the small sitting room where Rosa had shoved tea into my hand and grief into my lap. One glance at my face, one at the blood on my sleeve. Then he asked, where is he? In surgery. And you? The room had never been so quiet. I went to the bakery. I know. I had to get my mother out. You had to obey me. There was nothing theatrical in it, no masculine thunder, just a fact sharpened to an edge. I put the tea down because my hands had begun to shake. Tommaso chose to come. Because he knew you would do this. That landed. Because it was true. I hated him for being right. I hated myself more. He stepped closer. You made a choice. It cost blood. I swallowed around the thickness in my throat. Then let me pay for it. His jaw tightened once. You already are. He held out a passport and a train ticket. I stared. Your mother is with Rosa's sister in Connecticut. You can meet her there tonight. New names, temporary papers. If you go now, Corrado loses the leverage. I looked from the ticket to his face. You're sending me away. I'm giving you a way out. That was different, and somehow crueler. At Penn Station an hour later, the platform smelled like metal, wet wool, and leaving. Nico carried my bag with the solemn face of a man transporting human organs. I hate this plan, he said. I noticed. Also, Teresa cried for exactly 12 seconds and then called me dramatic, which is emotional terrorism. I almost smiled. It hurt too much. The train idled, doors open, real exit. No trap, no lock from the outside. No one forcing my body one way or the other. Dante stood a little apart, black coat, unreadable face, rain drying at his shoulders. He had arranged everything. He would let me go. That was the unbearable part. I stepped onto the train. Then I looked out and saw blood on the cuff of his shirt that was not his. Tommaso's, probably. The cost of my mistake. And I understood with terrible clarity what leaving would mean. Not safety. Not really. Just ignorance purchased by other people bleeding in my place. I stepped back down. Nico made a startled noise like a goose witnessing tax fraud. Dante didn't move. If I go, I said, voice shaking, I spend the rest of my life pretending I didn't choose who paid for my escape. I gripped my father's envelope in one hand and my cane in the other. If I stay, I lose whatever version of me still thought life would go back. Yes, he said. The honesty steadied me more than comfort could have. I looked at the open train doors, then at him. Then I turned my back on the platform and walked toward the dark with my eyes open. I chose it myself. Tommaso survived the night, not because the world was merciful, because he was too stubborn to die before correcting everyone's paperwork. When I went to see him the next morning, he looked waxy and furious under hospital white sheets in the estate infirmary. A line ran into his arm. Another monitor ticked numbers into the air as if reducing a human being to arithmetic might help. "You came back," he said without opening his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Yes," he said. "You are." That should have stung. It did. But his hand shifted slightly over the blanket, and when I laid my fingers against it, he turned them over once and squeezed. "Don't do that again," he murmured. "I'm beginning to notice a theme." His mouth moved by half a breath. "Good." He slept after that. I stood there longer than I needed to, because it was easier than facing the rest of the house. By afternoon, Dante had every entrance doubled and every phone checked twice. Matteo oversaw half of it himself, composed as lit candle wax. He spoke softly to guards. He brought Rosa fresh batteries for the emergency radios. He asked me if I had eaten. That should have mattered too. It did, in the worst possible way. The envelope from my father contained only a recipe card and a note. "If Sophia ever opens the cane, trust the man who comes after the second fire, not the first." I must have read it 50 times. It made no sense, or too much. By evening, the storm broke. Rain hammered the windows. The estate went dim and silvery. Rosa kept everyone in the kitchen longer than necessary, feeding security men pasta under the guise of morale. Nico ate 2 bowls and whispered to me, "If I die tonight, tell Teresa I resisted heroically." She made the pasta. "Then tell her I died betrayed." It made me laugh, softly, enough to breathe. Matteo came in near 9 and said Dante wanted me moved to the lower safe suite for the night. No one argued. He had that kind of authority in the house, quiet, accepted, dangerous by delegation. I took my cane. Matteo took the back hall. The lower safe suite was not where he led me. At first I thought we'd turned wrong because the corridor narrowed and the stone underfoot changed from polished marble to old service tile. The air got colder, less lived in, more storage than home. "Matteo," I said, "this is," he stopped. He didn't turn immediately. When he did, the look on his face was so tired it almost broke me. "I know," he said. 2 men stepped out from the shadow behind the old refrigeration room before I could shift my weight properly. One caught my arms, the other took my cane. I kicked, hard, uselessly. Pain flared white through my hip. "Don't hurt her," Matteo snapped, sharper than I had ever heard him. The men obeyed. That made it worse. I stared at him. "You," his throat worked once. "I tried to keep you out of it. You poisoned his coffee." "No," he looked honestly offended. "That was Corrado being theatrical. You brought me here." "Yes, why?" His face changed then. Not colder, more human. That was the ugliest part. Because my brother has 2 daughters and Corrado knows their school route. Because Dante would burn cities for the people he loves and Corrado would burn them anyway. Because men like me don't get clean choices. The words landed with a dull, terrible weight. Villainy would have been easier, pure evil, clean hatred. This was only a different shape of fear. They locked me in the old freezer room behind the kitchens of the estate's original service wing. The cooling unit no longer worked, but the walls held cold like memory. A single bulb buzzed overhead. Metal shelves lined the room, one drain in the floor, one heavy door with no inside handle. I stood very still until the panic passed enough to think. Then I took inventory: apron hook, rusted shelving bracket, old industrial sink just outside the bars of the interior partition. No windows. No blanket, my cane gone. My hand found the small pocket of my cardigan automatically. Inside was the pastry thermometer Rosa had teased me for carrying everywhere. Slim, steel, pointed, not much. An hour later, Corrado Vescari arrived. I knew him before Matteo named him. Not because I had seen him, because Dante had once spoken of survival like it had a face. Corrado was older than I expected and more elegant, which felt unfair. Silver at the temples, black gloves, the kind of voice that never needed to hurry because it had spent a lifetime being obeyed. He looked at me as if I were a page he had finally bothered to read. "Bellini," he said, "you have your father's eyes." I moved back a fraction. "You killed him." He tilted his head. "Your father made the same mistake Dante is making now. He kept evidence in the name of decency. He thought if he held enough proof, he could bargain for the lives around him. And Bianca, that landed, just a flicker. Bianca, he said, was collateral to a lesson Dante failed to learn quickly. Cold moved under my skin so violently I thought I might be sick. "You taught him that," I whispered. "I saved him," Corrado said. "Men who lead families cannot afford softness. I gave him the only education that lasts." He actually believed it. That was the worst thing I had learned in his presence. The recipe card in my pocket scraped against my wrist when I clenched my fist. Second fire, not the first. My father's note beat against my thoughts like a trapped bird. Corrado stepped closer to the bars. "Do you know why he noticed you?" I said nothing. "Because you did not beg after touching him." Nobody in his world lays a hand on Dante Salvator without wanting something. He smiled then, and I understood in one clear, nauseating instant that he knew exactly which thread to cut. "That is why you are dangerous." When he left, he took Matteo with him, but not before Matteo looked back once. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't answer. There are apologies too small to survive the room they're spoken in. After midnight, I heard enough through the hall to piece together the plan. Corrado wasn't attacking the estate next. He was going to the old Salvator restaurant, the second fire, and Dante did not know yet. The cold in the freezer room was the kind that made time dishonest. Minutes stretched. My feet went numb and came back wrong. The bulb overhead buzzed itself into my skull until I wanted to scream just to drown it out. I did not. I thought of my father sanding the cane by our kitchen window. I thought of Tommaso bleeding across the bakery tile because I had been stupid enough to confuse love with defiance. And I thought of Dante's mouth on mine in the church basement, controlled even then, like restraint had become his first language, and I had heard him forget it for one breath. I couldn't break here. Not where Corrado would enjoy imagining it, so I worked. The old industrial sink outside the inner bars had one dripping tap, and blessedly, a pilot light line feeding the dead freezer unit. Gas. Minimal, but there. Enough to matter if encouraged. I took the slim steel pastry thermometer from my pocket and knelt by the drain. The room smelled like old metal and dust. Under it, faintly, was the ghost of stale sugar from some long-ago kitchen use before this wing became storage. I could work with heat. I understood what happened when things were pushed right to the edge of burning. The thermometer unscrewed. The inner wire was thin, sharp, almost useless in any civilized setting. Here, it was a gift. It took me 20 minutes to loosen one rusted bracket from the lowest shelf. Another 10 to pry the grate over the floor drain just enough to free the screw. My fingers shook from cold. Twice I dropped the wire. Twice I picked it up again. When footsteps came once down the hall, I curled on the floor and pretended defeat until they passed. Then I crawled to the gas line. I did not know how to build bombs. I knew how sugar behaved under heat and pressure and how people noticed fire before they noticed escape. I loosened the line with the bracket just enough to let the smell begin. Then I took the paper recipe card from my father's envelope, folded it into a tight wick, and waited. The waiting hurt more than the cold. I thought of the note. Trust the man who comes after the second fire, not the first. Maybe my father had meant Dante. Maybe he had known a man like him would eventually follow the trail. Maybe he had only hoped. Either way, I needed noise. When the smell thickened, I snapped the bulb casing with the shelf bracket and caught the shower of tiny sparks against the paper. It took on the third try. Flame crawled fast and ugly along the dry edge, dropped, kissed the gas. The burst was small, loud enough. Heat slammed the wall. Smoke rolled under the door. Alarms began screaming somewhere beyond the service hall. Men shouted. I stepped back as the warped inner latch of the freezer partition popped under pressure. Not freedom, but movement. I shoved through into the hall, half coughing, half crying, one hand over my mouth. No cane. My limp was a white-hot thing now, dragging badly on the old tile. A guard rounded the corner. I drove the broken thermometer wire into the side of his wrist before he could reach me. He swore, dropped the gun, and I hit the alarm lever on the wall with the shelf bracket so hard it snapped sideways. More noise, more running feet. I wanted Dante to have a chance to find me. I wanted to still be alive when he did. The outer service door burst inward. For one split second, I thought it was Matteo. I would have killed him with my bare hands if it had been. Instead, it was Nico in a rain-dark coat, eyes wild, gun up, shouting, "If anybody dies before I marry Teresa, I'll be furious." I laughed and sobbed at the same time. Dante came behind him like the answer to a threat. Smoke curled around him. There was blood on his collar, none of it fresh enough to calm me. His gaze found me, and the entire world narrowed to that. He crossed the hall in 3 strides. I took one. That was all I had. He caught me before the floor could. "I'm here," he said. The words went through me like impact. Behind him, gunfire cracked deeper in the service wing. Nico hauled the dropped weapon away with the mournful efficiency of a man cleaning up after the apocalypse. "I would like recognition," he muttered, "for entering a haunted basement while underfed." Dante ignored everything but me. His hands moved over my face, my shoulders, my wrists, checking damage without asking permission because fear had burned the question out of him. "I started a fire," I whispered. His forehead touched mine for one impossible second. "I know, I didn't break." "No," his voice roughened. "You didn't." That was when Matteo stepped into the far doorway with blood on his sleeve and no gun in his hand. Nico swung toward him instantly. Dante turned only enough to put me behind him. "Boss," Matteo said, and the word was already an elegy. "Where is Corrado?" Dante asked. Matteo looked at me once. Shame lived in him now like a second skeleton. "Heading to Mulberry." "The old restaurant. He said if he couldn't turn you back into what he made, he'd bury you where it started." Nico swore under his breath. "You have 30 seconds, Dante said. "I know," Matteo swallowed. "My brother's girls are already gone. Tommaso moved them an hour ago." I blinked. "Tommaso? He woke up angry," Nico said. "It was inspiring." Matteo's mouth shook once. "I thought I could keep the damage smaller. I thought if I gave Corrado routes and schedules, he'd spare civilians." He looked at Dante then, straight on. "You were right. He never spares anyone." Dante's face gave nothing away. "Then why help us now?" I asked. Matteo answered me, not him. "Because you looked at me like I was still a man." There are cruelties with no useful reply. The next shot came from somewhere behind Matteo. It punched through him with a horrible, blunt finality. He folded without grace, blood blooming fast, and Corrado's voice carried faintly from farther down the hall. "See," he called. "Softness." Dante handed me to Nico and went absolutely still. I had seen violence from him before. Efficient, controlled. This was something colder. The version of a storm that forgot land existed. He killed the 2 men who came after with less noise than the alarms. Then he came back for me. Dante, she was shaking and standing anyway. Smoke in her hair, soot on her face. No cane, no shield, and she still met my eyes like the world had not taken the best thing out of her. The first night, she tied my hand and asked for nothing. I had told myself that was curiosity, then inconvenience, then danger. It was none of those, it was hunger. For the one thing Corrado had beaten out of me young, the stupid, ruinous hope that gentleness might survive contact with men like us. He lifted me into his arms because my leg would not carry me fast enough, and because arguing with him then would have been its own form of madness. As we burst into the rain, Tommaso's voice came through Nico's earpiece, weak and furious from the infirmary. "Tell the boss if he lets Corrado reach Bianca's room first, I'll personally climb out of bed and kill him." Dante's mouth hardened. Mulberry Street waited ahead. One of us might not survive it. The Salvator restaurant had been dead for 14 years. Still, when the convoy turned onto Mulberry, it looked like a ghost pretending at architecture. Boarded windows. Stone frontage blackened by old weather, the sign long removed. Yet I could still see where a family place must once have breathed there, front windows full of light, late dinners, too much garlic in the winter air. "Bianca's room?" I asked from the back seat. Dante didn't answer immediately. "Upstairs office," Nico said more softly than I had ever heard him. "She used to do homework there. Boss kept it closed after." Dante looked out the window. Nico, sorry. No, I thought he was. The cars stopped hard. Men moved fast. Rain slicked the pavement to black glass. Dante helped me out, then reached into the front seat and handed me my cane. I stared. The walnut was scorched near the handle, probably from the service wing fire, but intact. "You kept it," I said. His hand stayed on it 1 second longer than necessary. "Always." We entered through the kitchen. The smell hit first. Wet plaster, old ash, gas, a place wounded long enough to go quiet about it. My cane tapped once on the cracked tile, tap drag, and the sound seemed to wake the rooms. Dante's men spread. Nico stayed at my side, gun drawn, expression unusually grim. "On the off chance anyone asks," he whispered, "I would rather be in bed eating contraband bread. You say that every day." "Yes. But tonight it has moral force." We moved past the dead ovens and the prep tables scarred by time. On one wall, barely visible under soot, a child's height marks remained in pencil. Bianca, I thought. The upstairs office door was open. Corrado stood inside as if he owned memory itself. He had 2 men left. Not many. Not because he lacked power, I realized. Because he had spent it all like a man certain this was the only ending worth buying. On the desk beside him sat 3 things: a metal case wired to a detonator, a framed photo turned face down, and a ledger bound in dark leather. Dante went very still. "Come in," Corrado said. "Let the girls see what made you." No one moved first. Then Corrado smiled faintly. "Your father begged less than Bellini did, for what that's worth." Something in me tore. Dante took 1 step into the room. "You killed her father because he kept copies. I killed him because he believed innocence was leverage." Corrado's gaze slid to me. "And because he chose to hide proof inside a crippled girl's cane. Ingenious, really." Nico made a low sound beside me that I had never heard from him before. Pure hatred. Dante's voice lost all warmth. "Do not call her that again." Corrado almost looked pleased. "There you are, villain, teacher, mirror." I saw it then with sick clarity. Corrado did not want only to win. He wanted proof that Dante was still the boy he had broken, obedience over love, strategy over life, ledger over sister. On the desk, the detonator light blinked red. "Gas line in the lower kitchen," Corrado said conversationally. "1 button and the whole building goes. You know how quickly fire climbs old vents. You learned that once." Dante's shoulders locked. I looked at the leather ledger. Old. Important. Whatever proof existed against Corrado, against the years of shell companies and murders and bombs, it was there. He wanted Dante to choose again. Ledger or life, evidence or us. I heard my father's note in my head. Trust the man who comes after the second fire. The second fire. "Dante," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. Corrado did. "Careful, girl. Advice kills more than bullets." I kept my gaze on the room. On the old office, the broken cabinet glass, the exposed pipe near the floor where rainwater had leaked in for years. On the desk, on the metal case. Pastry teaches heat, yes, but it also teaches timing, pressure, structural weakness, and smell. The gas wasn't strongest near the case. It was strongest under the floor vent to the left. "It's a bluff," I said. Every face in the room turned. Corrado's smile thinned. "The detonator is real," I said, heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. "But the lower line already has too much gas in it. If he meant to blow the building now, he wouldn't be standing here breathing it. The charge is directional." I pointed with my cane. "That case is for the desk, the ledger." Nico blinked. "I love it when she gets terrifying." Corrado's eyes cooled. "You are your father's daughter. Yes, I said, and he hated men who wasted good theater. Dante moved then. Everything after happened too fast and too clearly. Corrado hit the detonator. The desk blew sideways in a burst of wood and flame, just as I had guessed, not enough to take the room but enough to blind and maim. Dante shoved me down behind the doorframe. Nico fired. One of Corrado's men dropped. The other got off 2 shots before Tommaso, white as death, somehow there, bleeding through a fresh bandage under his coat, appeared in the hall and shot him through the throat. Unbelievable, Nico shouted. He actually got out of bed. Tommaso swayed. I hate all of you. Then Corrado grabbed the leather ledger and went for the back stairs. Dante followed. I pushed up, legs screaming, and went after them because love had finally ruined my judgment in ways fear never could. Nico swore and came with me. We hit the kitchen corridor just as Corrado reached the old pantry door. There, beneath the scorched archway, he turned with a gun in one hand and the ledger in the other. You still think love makes you better? He asked Dante. It only makes you late. Dante kept walking. Gunshot. Tommaso staggered between them before I even understood he had moved. The bullet took him high in the chest. He looked shocked, then annoyed, as if death had interrupted paperwork. No, I said. He hit the wall and slid down it, blood everywhere, eyes finding mine once with unbearable clarity. For the record, he whispered, voice wet, I liked you. Then he was gone. The world narrowed to one red point. Dante crossed the distance and put Corrado through the pantry shelving hard enough to break wood. The gun skidded away. The ledger fell open, pages tearing loose like dark birds. Corrado laughed with blood in his teeth. Choose, he said. Again. Dante's right hand, the damaged one, closed around Corrado's throat. I saw the moment he understood the true cost. Not prison, not power, not blood. If he killed the man who made him, some part of the old logic holding his life together would die too. There would be no one left to blame for what he had become, only himself. He did it anyway, not quickly, not cruelly, simply with the terrible certainty he used on every irreversible thing. When Corrado stopped moving, the kitchen felt louder, not quieter. Rain on broken glass, Nico shouting for medics, my own breathing gone ragged. The ledger pages drifting across dirty tile in gas-scented air. Dante sank to one knee beside Tommaso's body. He looked smaller somehow, though nothing in him had lessened. More real, more breakable. His right hand shook once and did not stop. I knelt beside him and took that hand in both of mine. He let me. For the first time, he let me feel it. The damage, the tremor. The cost he had carried under control for years. Outside, sirens began at last, called too late to matter. Nico stood in the shattered doorway with tears on his face and anger bright as prayer. Boss, he said hoarsely, the gas team says it's contained. Dante looked at Corrado's body, then at Tommaso, then at me. It is over, he said, and nothing in the room argued back. War ended badly. That was the only honest way to say it. Corrado was dead. The surviving pages of the ledger buried 6 shell companies and 3 judges who had spent years laundering respectability through blood. Matteo's testimony, recorded before he died, finished what the paperwork began. Men disappeared into cells or the river, depending on which side reached them first. And Tommaso was buried on a clear morning under a hard blue sky that made grief feel personally mocked. Rosa wore black and fed everyone anyway. Nico cried openly, then denied it with such conviction no one dared insult the effort. Dante stood at the grave with one hand in his coat pocket and the other bandaged again, not from a fresh wound, but from the old damage worsened by the fight with Corrado. The surgeon called it survivable. Dante called it irrelevant. It was. He dropped a fountain pen into the grave before the first shovelful of earth. Why that? I asked later. We were alone in the west garden, cold sunlight caught in the bare branches above us. My cane pressed soft patterns into the damp path. Because he hated borrowing mine, Dante said. I laughed despite myself, then cried because laughter had become wired to loss now. He watched me do both and didn't try to fix either. That was one of the ways I knew I loved him. My mother left for Connecticut under her own name and Rosa's terrifying protection network, which apparently extended through convent kitchens, funeral homes, and 2 retired boxers in New Haven. The bakery on Mulberry could not be reopened. Not safely, not honestly. I signed the papers to sell the lease and felt 24 years of imagined future fold in half with the sound of a pen. That was the price of choosing with my eyes open. I did not regret it, I only mourned it. 6 weeks after Corrado's death, the estate was quieter, not safe, never that, but quieter. Fewer guards at breakfast, more windows open in the kitchen. Teresa finally let Nico carry sacks of flour without mocking his posture, which in this house counted as courtship, and in Nico's mind, qualified as divine intervention. "I'm taking it slow," he told me solemnly while stealing roasted potatoes. "We are in a phase of cautious carbohydrate intimacy. You're impossible, and yet beloved." He was, infuriatingly. I had begun working with Rosa 3 mornings a week, building desserts for the restaurant Dante planned to reopen under a new name. Legitimate books, legitimate suppliers. No shadows in the walls if he could help it. He never said the project was for Bianca. He didn't need to. He checked tile samples like they were confessionals. He argued over oven calibration with the ferocity of a man trying to rebuild something more fragile than brick. He also stopped himself 3 more times. Once in the new kitchen, when flour dusted my cheek, and he reached up to brush it away, thumb catching my skin just long enough to change the room. Once in the library, when I fell asleep over invoice folders, and woke with his coat around me, and his gaze already turned aside. And once on the back terrace in rain, when I stood too close, and his hand went to the curve of my waist before he stepped back, as if the wanting itself needed discipline. Each time I felt the line between us brighten. Each time he chose not to cross it. By the time he asked me to walk with him after dinner on a Thursday in early spring, the lemon tree in Rosa's kitchen had new buds, and the marble under my feet no longer felt borrowed. He took me to the small greenhouse at the far edge of the property. It smelled like damp earth, rosemary, and the first impossible note of lemon blossom. Candlelight sat in old jars along the stone path inside, not ostentatious, not arranged by a florist. Arranged by a man who had watched me work enough to know I would hate spectacle and trust intention. I stopped just inside the door. "You did this?" "No," he said. Nico did half of it and nearly set himself on fire. From behind a hedge of potted basil came Nico's offended whisper. "That was 1 candle, and it was rude." I laughed so hard I had to catch the doorframe. Then Dante stepped closer, and the laughter changed into something quieter. He wore black as always. But without a coat, without body armor, without a room full of men around him. Just Dante, which was somehow more dangerous than all the rest. "I don't have a speech," he said. "That's probably for the best." A shadow of warmth moved through his eyes. Little shadow. There it was, the name that had once been possession, then placement, then warning. In his mouth now, it sounded like home wearing a scar. He reached into his pocket and drew out not a velvet ring box, not a dramatic display, but a simple gold band threaded onto a strip of white ribbon. I stared at it so hard the room blurred. "The first thing you ever gave me was practical," he said. "I've learned that's your preferred language." My throat closed. He held the ring between us. "I can offer you a life that will always have edges. Men like me do not retire into softness. I can offer honesty, protection when you want it, space when you need it. And every part of me I still know how to give." The greenhouse went utterly still. "I won't ask you for forever like it's clean," he said. "It is, but I am asking." I could not speak for a second. "Then you make it sound terrifying." "It is." That was when I started crying, not gracefully, not prettily. Just helpless tears in a greenhouse full of herbs and lemon blossom, because he had not lied to me. Not once, not when it would have been easier. And something in me had been waiting for exactly that kind of mercy. I held out my hand. "Yes," I whispered. "But if you ever hide an injury from me again, I reserve the right to become unbearable." "Accepted." He slid the ring onto my finger with his damaged right hand, careful despite the tremor. Then he bent and pressed his mouth to my knuckles like the gesture hurt him more than violence ever had. When I touched his face, he closed his eyes. Nico, from the basil, blew his nose loudly and said, "Teresa is going to pretend she's not crying, but I know my woman." Teresa's voice came from somewhere outside the greenhouse. "I am not your woman. You wound me," Nico called. "Yes," Rosa added dryly from farther off, "but not fatally, a pity." I laughed through tears again. Dante's forehead rested briefly against mine. "What now?" I asked. He looked around the candle-lit greenhouse, the herbs, the ribbon still trailing from my hand. "Now," he said, "we go inside before Nico narrates the rest of our lives." Later that night, back in the quiet of my room, our room. Though I had not learned how to think the word without startling, I heard his step in the hall, then the softer answer of my cane when I rose to meet him. Two sounds, both ordinary. 9 months later, the restaurant opened on a Tuesday. Not the old name, never that. Some ghosts deserve the dignity of staying buried. The new sign over the mulberry door read Bianca's table in clean gold letters, modest enough to look unplanned and deliberate enough to be prayer. The first floor was light now. Lemon tile behind the espresso bar, walnut shelving. White curtains at the front windows, because I insisted, despite Dante saying curtains were a tactical weakness, and Rosa telling him to stop flirting with architecture. The upstairs office remained small, but no longer closed. One wall held framed recipes in Bianca's, handwriting beside my father's old shorthand key, preserved behind glass because the dead had earned witness. On opening morning, the kitchen smelled like coffee, yeast, orange peel, and courage. I stood at the prep counter, with my engagement ring under nitrile gloves, and my cane hooked within reach of the flour bin. Tap drag on the tile whenever I crossed the room. A sound I no longer heard as apology, just presence. Mine. Rosa supervised 6 cooks in 3 ovens like a benevolent warlord. Teresa handled the front pastry case, with such ferocity customers straightened when she looked at them. Nico, in a shirt one size too tight, because he believed tailoring could defeat biology, floated between deliveries and dramatic sighs. "I haven't eaten bread in 4 days, he told me as if confessing mortal sin. "You stole focaccia at 6:30. That was medicinal. Tommaso should have been there to correct everyone's invoices and complain about licensing." The space he left did not vanish because life continued. It only learned how to stand beside joy without swallowing it. Dante came in through the rear kitchen door just after 11, bringing winter air and that familiar cedar-dark scent I still noticed before I saw him. The room changed in the small old way it always had, not because people feared him now, though many still did, because power remained a physical fact in him even when he wore it gently. He crossed straight to me. "What did you forget?" I asked. He held up his right hand. A thin line of blood ran across the back of it where one of the wine crates had caught him during delivery. Not deep enough. For one heartbeat, the kitchen disappeared. Ballroom, white ribbon, blood. Him asking who I was like the question might alter weather. I reached for the spool of white pastry box ribbon hanging near the parchment shelf without looking away from him. Nico noticed first. He went very still, which for Nico counted as reverence. Dante said nothing. I took his hand, the same hand, more scar under the skin now, more honesty in the tremor, less distance. I wrapped the ribbon once, twice, and tied it tight enough to hold. This time he did flinch, not from pain, from memory, from all of it. "You're staring," I murmured. "You still do it." The kitchen noise moved around us, trays, ovens, Rosa insulting a mixer in Sicilian, but the center held. "Do what?" I asked, though I knew. He looked at the knot I had made. Then at me. "You touch me like it costs you nothing," he said quietly. "And every time it takes everything I have not to fall apart." I had no answer ready for that, no cleverness, no shield. So I told the truth the way I had learned to tell it with him. "It costs me something," I said. "I just do it anyway." His gaze changed. There are moments when love feels less like warmth than impact. This was one, not soft, not simple, just final, not because it erased what came before. Because it proved we had carried it here and still built something that smelled like sugar and bread instead of smoke. Rosa clapped once from across the kitchen. If you two are done staring like widowers in a museum, table 6 needs the cannoli tray. Nico pressed a hand to his chest. I would also like it noted that I too am bleeding emotionally. Teresa walked past him with a tray of espresso cups. That's from vanity, not injury, he brightened. You know me so well. Laughter moved through the kitchen. Warm, ordinary, impossible once. Dante's thumb brushed the inside of my wrist before he let me go. A small touch, a world. Come outside with me, he said. I followed him through the back door into the alley behind the restaurant, the winter air sharp with coffee grounds, wet brick, and the river smell drifting up from downtown. The city sounded alive in every direction. Delivery trucks, a distant siren, someone arguing in Italian half a block away. My cane marked the pavement between us in that old rhythm, tap drag, until he stopped beneath the service light and turned to face me. The first night he had followed me outside, I had thought my life was ending. Maybe it had. Maybe some lives have to end so the real one can begin. He lifted my ribbon-tied hand and looked at the knot as if it were still the most devastating thing anyone had ever done to him. You know, he said, voice low, the first time I heard that cane on marble, I thought you were someone the room had already decided not to see. I smiled, though my throat ached. And now, he said, taking one careful step closer, I hear it and know exactly where home is. The nickname should have ruined me less by now. It didn't. He touched the white ribbon once, then bent and kissed the center of my forehead with a tenderness that still startled me more than any violence ever had. Come inside, little shadow. Warm this time. Entirely warm, so I did. And when my cane sounded softly against the kitchen tile again, he looked up before anyone else, just like the first night. Only now, when he followed me, it was not into darkness. It was into the life we had built. Would you have chosen Dante, knowing what it cost to love him?